Bye. This evening. Welcome to episode 21 of True Talks Live. The goal of this live stream talk show is to provide you with new perspective for project management in a format that is both entertaining and informative. Tonight's show is being recorded and will be available later on YouTube. My name is Beth May, and I am your MC for tonight. True Talks Live is co-sponsored by PMI Southern Maryland and PMI WDC. Our creator and executive producer is Harry Zolkauer, current president of PMI Southern Maryland. Our director of communications is Marta Leva, and our producer is Dan Stay. Our topic tonight is a topic that is near and dear to my heart: risk. Risk management is essential for project success, but we all do risk management all the time, whether we realize it or not. Doing risk management intentionally and with discipline can dramatically improve your chance for success, regardless of what activity you are executing, professionally or personally. When I was the program risk and opportunity manager for a $1 billion defense contract, I found myself applying the principles of good risk management to every area of my life. That's probably not unusual. I think a lot of us project managers tend to bring our project management approach to other areas of our lives. I have to laugh, though, when I recall how I used risk management principles to school my sons when they became new drivers. I told them that even if the probability of getting into an accident was low, as they seemed to think, the impact of having an accident could be severe: death. I asked them to be careful to reduce the probability of an accident and reminded them to wear their seatbelts to reduce the impact of an accident. That was my project manager mom's way of telling them, drive safely. Our host is someone who always drives safely, Kendall Lott. Kendall is president of PMI WDC, CEO and president of Empowered Strategies, and chairman of the board and co-founder for the nonprofit Project Management for Change. Also, he hosts the podcast PM Point of View. Kendall's guests tonight have deep and varied experience with risk management: Carl Pritchard and Lee Lambert. Carl Pritchard is a globally recognized lecturer, author, researcher, and instructor specializing in risk and communications management. As the principal and founder of Pritchard Management Associates, he has contributed significantly to the project management community. Carl's expertise spans project essentials, including risk management, network diagramming, team motivation, and the challenges of training on the internet. Lee Lambert has nearly 45 years of experience and is a thought leader in project management. Recognized for his contribution to education and practitioner measurement standards, Lee has implemented enterprise project management processes and educated more than 40,000 professionals in 22 countries. He played a key role in the creation of PMI's Project Management Professional Credential and is a past president of the PMI Central Ohio chapter. Over to you, Kendall.
Hey, good evening, and welcome all, and welcome, Beth. Thank you for the lead-in there and the explanation. I'm curious about a couple of things. We've got some corrections and emendations to make. First of all, are you about to start banging the drums? I'm used to what I'm seeing Harry say we're going to do live music, and guys, wait for it. It's going to happen. It's going to happen, but I didn't realize you were going to be the drummer for the band. I want to get the band together, but...
Maybe a post-show jam session.
Is that literally your jam? Are you a drummer?
These are my drums. I am not much of a drummer.
Well, for those of you that need to...
So the backstory is they were given to me on my 15th wedding anniversary by my husband, and I was very surprised, and I waited a respectful amount of time, and then I asked him, why did he give me drums? And he said, because you said you always wanted drums. And I said, well, I actually said I always wanted to know how to play drums. But after I got my own drum kit, my sons took drum lessons and they taught me, and I can keep a decent rock beat.
Well, excellent. It's the perfect aunt gift to the sister you want to drive nuts, right? Here's your 6-year-old's drum. So that's classic. I love it. I love the positioning. I wish I had the same prompt there. Then another correction there. A couple of things on that. I do in fact run the PM point of view for all of you who've ever been checking in on that. The last episode though was in November because A, I ran out of guests, and B, I ran into clients. So I've been so busy I haven't been able to get a new episode up there. But there are 120 episodes up there for people to check into. I invite you to do that. And then lastly, a new correction. As of the new year, I am no longer the chair of PMI WDC. In fact, Uma Hiramaglu is the chair there now. And the board has had some of its change into the new year, and it was my time to roll off after a couple of years. So still affiliated, and we're still connected. I'm sorry?
Oops, time sure does fly. I didn't realize your
It does fly.
Okay.
2 years called out of retirement, but now going back into retirement. So that'll be good for us there. So moving on to that, I was really excited when Harry flagged these two guests. I don't know if all of you know about these guests much today, but Beth, we're really hitting a reality show today. This is different than the other ones that we've done in some ways, I think. It's almost not even a show. It's more of an exposition of things. We move from the very abstract, which we will cover some, on project risk. You just heard about Beth saying, you can apply it from talking to safety to your kids up to $1 billion or multi-billion-dollar programs. But we also deal with very real situations and risk in different areas of our life. And today, both the two guests that we have are champions of risk, very knowledgeable of risk, both professionally, how that has worked across projects, how it works in our industry, and how indeed it works personally. They are both venerable, esteemed PMI stalwarts. They are people who represent this organization and help promote it and promote its effectiveness. So it's very important for us to hear from them today. Indeed, today are truly some true talks, as we're going to talk about it from a personal perspective. So we're going to hit it a little differently than we often do. Instead of one guest and then a second guest, we're going to bring them both right on up at the same time. So thank you for those introductions, Beth, and let's bring up our Meisters. I was told not to call them masters because they said that implied old. I don't know what that's all about, but at any rate, here we are today with them. So I have on my left, let's see, I'm looking at Lee on my left and Carl on my right. Gentlemen, how are you this evening?
Good. Doing well. Absolutely. Very well.
Excellent. Well, that's good to hear because that way we know we're still crafting towards our risk mitigation strategies personally, right? Everybody's doing well. That's important for us. So we're going to move past some of our standard risk management discussions today. We're not going to reject risk management. We're going to use it. We're going to talk about it in some different contexts that I think many of our listeners will find interesting and may even be somewhat familiar with some of the discussion. We're going to move past the abstract into personal risk. And this is a real reality about how we can use some of the same techniques that we use in project management for how we address any type of risk scenario and risk analysis, from which I think all of us has something to learn. So what I would like to do for the first part of our show today is kick out some of the key structures and topics that we study along the way on risk. So I'll ask each of you, Carl, I've actually heard a lot from you on risk before. I know this is something you teach too. I'll start with you. When you think about risk management broadly, what are some of the main considerations that you have found most important as you're addressing it professionally and around your life generally, from what you've had to teach on and what you see?
Probably the biggest thing is other people. Other people have a much better idea as to what's happened in the past. They have perspective. They have reflection. They have the ability to actually tell us, hey, you know what? You probably hadn't thought of this, but, and they're the ones who will actually set us up with some real, just profound wisdom. It's up to us to accept it and to seek it out. Tragically, a lot of times we rely on our own expertise, our own backgrounds, when in fact it's the backgrounds of others that actually give us the leverage that we need. For any type of risk, be it personal or professional, if you can get others to actually say, hey, just so you know, this could happen to you. If we can get them to look into the crystal ball rather than us looking into the crystal ball, that's a big, big advantage. That's a
I
very
am
big deal.
very surprised by your answer and love the answer. Thank you for that. I had not considered that at all. I want to push back a second, or rather highlight. When you said other people, I had to laugh because I thought you meant that was the source of risk, because I was about to strongly agree. My biggest problem in risk is other people. Ask me what my biggest problems are. Other people,
Other people.
and getting things done. Other people. But that's not where you went, because you're a kind man. You're not a cynical man. You are a kind and open man who understands what we need to see there. What I heard you say that was important to me was it's about input. You're getting more people providing to you. This is a collaborative effort, then, it sounds like, in the context of effective risk management, risk mitigation, risk study.
Yeah, and it's funny. Lee professes to be, I profess to be risk gurus. We say we're freaking Einstein when it comes to risk, but the reality is, you're not Einstein unless you're actually enlisting other people, and it is not what I know, but what other people know. An interesting quick story: when I was a very young instructor in risk management, I had a guy come up to me and he walked up at the beginning of class and he goes, "What can you possibly teach me? I got nose hair that are older than you." And I'm like, "Yeah, great." So I said, "Okay." And I said, "Well, if you're only looking to learn from me, you'll learn nothing. But if you recognize the fact," and Lee exhibits this in spades, because she even said in his introduction, he's taught over 40,000 students. That means he's heard 40,000 voices. And if you're looking for insight, it's not Lee, it's not me, it's those 40,000 people out there that share their insights. And Lee and I, we just suck that information up and leverage it. That's where the real win is.
I've always known in the knowledge sciences, all the customers are actually the product, aren't they? So they're the sources of information. Just imagine a cacophony, 40,000 people. That's half a stadium, half a huge professional stadium. I remember Steve Martin once saying, "You know what? I'm going to retire on this. One show, $1 million a ticket." So just imagine you had all 40,000 people in one stadium, Lee, and then you're rocking and rolling. So that's the perfect setup for you, Lee. Big picture. What do you see in risk that's been one of the outstanding areas for us to consider, and broadly, professionally, personally, anything, when you look at your long career in studying and talking about this?
Well, the thing I found, it kind of ties to what Carl was saying, but it's from a little different perspective, is what I found with most of the students, to be frank, is they're deniers. They don't want to accept the fact that there could be a risk. And second of all, they don't want to ever think about the real probability and or impact. So half of the battle is getting them to understand, yeah, there is risk. There are things we need to worry about. I mean, I got 3 kids, and so obviously I didn't really plan my risk strategies very well. And because I now look back on the impact, should have stopped at 2. Just didn't do the risk assessment in that particular case. But that's what I found. I think once you get them to understand how risk can help them, then all of a sudden they go to what Carl said, and they start to throw input. Oh, yeah, now I wish I'd have known that 6 months ago or 5 years ago. And then they become believers, and then you got a different problem. And now they want to do risk analysis for everything. And pretty soon nothing gets done, but hell, we check that risk out, though. If we ever did anything, we're ready.
Well, you've just opened the door just between the two of you. We haven't even started yet. You already dug in so deep already. I just heard something really interesting. We learn more by getting the input from the different people that know either about risk or about the thing we are doing more than we do. And yet we're deniers. So those two things seem to really go closely together. It's harder to deny when everyone is telling you you're not paying attention to something, or there's another thing to probe, another thing to look at. I'm just curious, in your venerable careers, why do you think we're deniers? What's going on there when you say we're deniers? People seem to want to probe. People are afraid of negative outcomes. We know that. We know that we're actually more worried about a negative outcome than we are positive, per Kahneman and others. What's going on there that makes you think we're deniers?
self-fulfilling prophecy.
We can always achieve the goal.
That's what we're afraid of. It's like, wow, we got a dusting of snow overnight, by the way, where I live. And what's kind of intriguing about that, it was an 8-inch dusting. We got an 8-inch dusting of snow that I woke up to this morning. And what was kind of intriguing about that was it's one of those things where my wife said, well, why not just wait for it all to melt? It's going to be in the 40s today. It'll melt. And I'm like, no, got to plow out the driveway. And she's like, no, let it melt. And I'm like, if I don't plow it out and it freezes again overnight, it's going to be impossible to move. And she said, shh. I said, why shh? She says that a lot, by the way. But she goes, shh. And I'm like, why? And she said, don't say it. It might happen.
Will it into existence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Lee, thoughts on deniers? You've talked to 40,000 people. What's their need? Well, one thing I'll say this. I think the people providing the input are never the deniers. It's the people receiving the input. I'm just noticing we're all happy to tell someone else why they're being a denier and what they're not seeing, is my guess. But I don't know. Lee, what's your experience?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. I think that because they have this internalized denying going on, that they really don't want to accept the fact that there could be a problem. Carl and I have had health issues, as you probably know. I'm a big time denier when it comes to my health. I've been diabetic for about 35 years. And there's some things you're supposed to do to manage diabetes. You're supposed to do those. I asked, well, what's the issue? And he said, well, it can have long-term effects. You can have infections. You can have amputations. A lot of things can go wrong. And so I started to take the medication because I wanted to leave the appearance that I was actually managing it. And the downside that didn't come into my discussion was that when you're on insulin, you gain weight. I was already, as Carl knows, rather large. And so I went to the doctor and I said, my blood sugar is good. I'm gaining a lot of weight. I said, I'm a little concerned. He said, well, that's part of the problem is that when you manage it, other things happen. You can't count on one thing. It's not a straight line. And I said, well, when does this weight gain slow down? And he said, oh, listen, Lee, he said, once you hit about 600 pounds, it'll flatten a little bit. So I hadn't really thought about that, so I started to manage it. But it was a little bit too late. And this last trip I took to Europe, I ignored it. I had 6 stops on the tour. By the second stop, one of my toes had turned a different color, which was not flesh colored. And I could see what was going on. And by the 6th stop, which was somewhere in Europe, where was it?
Romania?
Lisbon, Portugal. I looked at my foot and said, I'll stick around for my presentation, but when that's done, I'm out of here. So they emerged me into Ohio, and then 2 hours later, I didn't have a right foot. Now, I got to tell you, if I had really considered the possibility that could happen, I suspect I would have done a lot better job of managing. Sometimes we don't learn until it happens. And then afterthought is, gosh, if I'd have just known. Well, you didn't know. We told you. Other people told you. But until it happens to you, you don't personalize it.
And I think we'll dig into that a little bit from a step-by-step process about what you found compelling in that story as you suffered that. So let's to be clear, you did have an amputation related to diabetes and the failure to manage your diabetes. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, that's
correct. How would you summarize your condition?
Well, the problem with it is it hits your feet first, usually, and you got to watch for infection. I ignored them. I was traveling so much and doing so many things, and there's no pain because of neuropathy, so I didn't know that it was hurting. And by the time I realized it was too late, the infection was halfway up my right leg. So I had amputation at the mid calf range. They assure me that I'll be fine, which I suspect I will be. I'm planning on traveling to Dubai in mid-February, so I hope so.
So one of the biggest things I heard there was, people may tell us and we may be deniers, and then there's also this ability for us to see knock-on effects to our own mitigation and our own engagement, and then not think about all of those. I know for me, often I hear something I should do. I can adjust for that, but it is in fact those other path-dependent knock-on effects that are more frustrating, and it just makes it like, this isn't worth it to me. Go ahead, Carl.
I was just going to say, too, you do have to look at the whole risk reward thing, because like Lee, this is turning into an organ recital. We want to avoid that. But like Lee, I have my health concerns. I'm at stage 4 cancer.
Well, we're going to go there now.
kicker,
Tell us about how this came about for you.
Well, actually, I'll go down the road I was about to go down, and then I'll come back. But in relation to what Lee was just talking about, it's a matter of, when you identify a risk, you have options. You do. You have options. You can mitigate it. You can do all the strategies: avoid, accept, mitigate, transfer. You can do any one of those. But the real key is to look at the risk reward. What's the opportunity? My first oncologist was evil. The guy was downright nasty. And no, I asked him at one point, I said, "Is this going to hurt?" And he said, "Oh, yeah." And I said, "It is." And he goes, "Yeah, big time." And I'm like, "Okay, but after it's over, will I have less pain, less discomfort? Will my condition be improved?" And he said, "Maybe." And I'm like, "Okay, so you're telling me you're going to put me through a lot of pain, and it's not necessarily going to fix anything?" He said, "Pretty much that's the story." And I went through the first round of treatments with him and fired him, because it did hurt. And it was one of those things where it was like, this is so bad. Then I found 2 other oncologists, both of which said, "I will not hurt you, and it will improve your condition." And what do you know? Risk reward. I said, "Okay, let's try again," because I was about ready to give up on the whole thing. And now, the opposite of Lee, though, when I put on weight and I go into the doctor's office, they go, "Oh, look, this is great. You put on another couple pounds." And it's like, they're actually happy about this, which to me is one of
analysis. Then let's back up and give us your scenario too. So there you were one day and suddenly not feeling well. I don't know. Walk us your journey. Tell us the story first.
I was essentially, life was going on, and I had been on a diet for 10 years doing the Atkins thing, and very, very slowly my weight had come down, and I hit a certain weight, and all of a sudden, boom, I lost 10 pounds in a matter of about 2 weeks. And I was like, wow, this is great. The diet's finally seriously kicked in. Well, in the course of a matter of about 6 weeks, I had lost 60 pounds. I don't look good 60 pounds less than I am right now. I looked pretty well gaunt. And I couldn't eat. My stomach was upset constantly. And when I went to the doctor, I sat down with him, and my wife was with me, and he goes, "Well, Mr. Pritchard," he said, "you have cancer, and it's incurable, and it's metastasized." And it's like, wow, thanks. Any good news? And he said, "Yeah." He said, "You probably got about 2 years. You want to get your affairs in order." That was 3 years ago. Now, as you can tell, I'm still a cancer patient. I don't care. I really don't. I'm just thrilled to be breathing and doing all my normal functions and training classes again and all that stuff. And I'm grateful to be putting on the pounds. Unlike Lee, it's like I take my insulin and I'm like, "Oh, good, I put on another pound." It's not a bad thing. But it was quite the travel to get here, because I've gone through every kind of therapy you could possibly imagine. I'm still on chemo. I do radiation therapy about once every 6 months. And, life is good once you find the right answer. And that goes to the actual risk point here. There's always got to be a point. And the point is, when you're a risk manager, first, assess risk reward. Is this really worth doing? And if your own gut tells you, I'm not seeing any potential reward at the end of this, walk away. I am so glad I quit Dr. Evil. I really am, because the oncologists I have now are just what I consider to be true professionals, consummate best at their game, and constantly looking for the next new thing that might stretch out my lifespan. My current prognosis is 10 to 15 years, which means I'll be almost as old as Lee when this is all over.
Well, first of all, congratulations on both of you feeling
Thanks.
healthy and being in this situation. That's a huge change. I heard some interesting things in there you guys were talking about. We just keep playing out here. You've got to source a lot of different opinions. We tend towards denial. We've got to look. You mentioned something that I've had you on my podcast even before. We don't really talk about the risk reward portion of our risk management. At least I don't remember that so much in PMI, the body of knowledge and things we look at. But that's clearly the real outcome. But you took it as, so I love that. Everybody listening, very first thing when you engage it in is, does it matter? And what are these different alternatives going to produce? Does it matter to me to undertake those? I ran across this in my own engagement in hiking the Appalachian Trail, where I realized one of the biggest problems that people have on the trail is they over adjust for risk. That's fine. But what happens is we're not trading off for reward. Are you so afraid that you're mitigating this risk at the cost of something else? And we don't know, and sometimes we don't know, right? So this fundamental look at risk reward is a great thing, and I wish it were more in our write-up in our body of knowledge. So everybody, risk reward when you start that. Secondly, I heard knock-on effects. Realize that as you mitigate or make a change to something, there may be something else happening. We may be still deniers at that point. My experience as well. It sounds like that's what happened with Lisa. You hit another thing I thought was really interesting, which were the signals. You got a signal, you were looking towards one set of risk. I need to reduce weight. You started to lose weight. Seemed like you were being effective. We need to be very careful with what we see. It sounds like. I mean, that was a real trigger for you.
Careful what you wish for. Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking to the signals, Lee, in your situation, did you have any signals where you thought you were okay and then you weren't, and you were misreading the tea leaves, as it were, or picking up the wrong tea leaf?
As it turns out, since I had that 6-country trip coming up, I started to have problems here at home, and so I went to the doctor, one of those emergency get in and get out kind of places. He said, "Oh yeah, your toe's getting bad." He said, "Let me give you some antibiotic, it'll be okay." So I took that for 10 days, and some color came back in my toe. So I thought, well, hell, I beat this thing. And so I went ahead and took the trip, knowing that I was potentially going to have that problem. And then I just gradually watched it get worse, the risk, but never did anything to mitigate it until it was too late. It took me to a doctor in Romania. He said, "I think we should operate." I said, "I'm not operating in Romania. That's another risk scenario completely." And so I made it through Lisbon and got back home. But I want to back up for just a minute. There's something that I've discovered, at least in my sojourn through the business, and that is I can get people to do what I call the easy part, and that is identifying the risk. I think if you look at the whole risk process, the easiest part is identifying the risk, because you don't have to be a brain surgeon to figure those out. The problem is a lot of people feel like once they've identified the risk, that's it, they're done. They've done risk management, and they don't move on to finish the cycle. So that's what I did. I saw the risk, I watched it happen, but what the heck? I've done this before. I mean, I've recovered from worse things than that, I suppose. And so I just ignored it. Except the Romanian doctor. I didn't ignore with that guy. He already had his saw out, man. And so I made sure that I did, in fact, mitigate it. Now I'm being very careful. I'm actually eating correctly, I'm supposed to watch my leg to see little red stringy things coming up my leg. Then we have to take off some more. So I'd rather not have that happen. And so I am, in fact, following up on the first phase as to get to the mitigation side.
I have so many questions, and you just gave us another signal. Though I do want to follow up on the identification is easy. It's about the taking action. Thoughts on that, Carl, yourself, in your own situation that you faced? Was that relevant?
I think Lee's dead on. I think he's absolutely right. And the identification piece is, it's like anybody, people say to me, how did you even know you had cancer? It's kind of like when you're dropping 10 pounds a week, you know something's hinky. And it's kind of like, well, this can't be good. Despite the fact I've been trying to lose weight, that is simply not a good sign. You get the warning signs, and the kicker is all too often, as Lee just pointed out, we ignore them. There are so many familiar risks that we run into on it. PMI in the 1990s did a study asking project managers what was their most common risk, and they said unclear requirements. Who knew? Yeah, it's like every single project has unclear requirements, and still, I don't need a requirements traceability matrix. That'd be a waste of time, and it's like, no, that would be a really good risk mitigation strategy. Yeah, but it's such a pain in the patoot. I don't want to do it. Hello. And like Lee's saying with his sugar, it's a matter of, you can pay me now or you can pay me later, but the piper will be paid.
I will pick up on this for our audience again. Something that I think is really important is I reflect how not because I've faced the personal challenges you guys have, but in the sense of like from PMI and learning and getting the book learning and experiencing with clients. I would say you're spot on with something here. It's a big deal to learn how it all works. And then you engage in the meetings around identification. We get caught in process broadly, I think, as project managers, and certainly around those following some of the PMBOK types of things when we just take them literally. The identification is a wrestling part. It is something to see and begin to understand. But then I've seen so many risk logs that have identified everything and no one has actually processed what it is to take. So a note, take action on. So a note to our listeners, we know that this is why we have problem with New Year's resolutions, right? Easy to identify, hard to take action. It is nothing happens until we make something happen. And that is a step that is really, really, really hard to take, I think, in a lot of cases. So I appreciate what you guys say about like identification is this whole process and we lay out what we would do, but then no one ever looks at it, which takes me, I want to go back to something we said, and we had a listener question on this, which is they call it derived risk, just to think a little more about it. When you see the cost of ensuring mitigation, the biggest thing I came across, and I'd like to, this was my trail experience, I'll ask you guys, the cost of mitigating risk or insuring against risk or choosing to acknowledge it and accept it is often never really considered. Hence the risk reward. The intervention has a cost and changes path dependency, changes what risk profiles we face. At least as a long trail through hiker, I experienced that. Can you guys speak to that at all? On derived risk, about how you begin to like see you would mitigate it and how that generated new costs of risks.
Yeah, let me take that for a second, Carl. I think this is the issue that I mentioned earlier, is that when someone actually grasps the concept of risk management, they run the risk of going down, as the questioner said, the rabbit hole of continued risks. And every risk you deal with sprouts new risks associated with that particular activity. And so literally you could go on forever. And to your point, Kendall, is how much do I spend? How much am I going to spend am I going to spend $1,000 to mitigate $100 risk? And it's common sense. I mean, it's today's world. The easiest place for me to kind of refer to this is the dating sites that we have right now. There's a risk process built into the dating sites. I hear women talk about it all the time. I hear men talk about it all the time. Well, did you see any red flags that red flag is a warning. There's a risk issue that needs to be paid attention to. It's everywhere. So what you've got to do is balance the mitigation that you're going to implement to where it makes sense from a strategic and a financial perspective.
Yeah.
And actually, to piggyback on that, I think a lot of people want to manage risk to the point where it's gone. It's never gone. It's not going anywhere. You can pretty much anticipate that risk is going to be with you always. The real key, though, is, and it's kind of funny. It goes back to the whole diagnosis prognosis thing. It's one of those things. 2 years of my life left, that was unacceptable. 15 years of my life left, yeah, I'll be in my 80s at that point. I think I can understand that might be when I'm past my prime. That's a possibility. But even then, there might be new solutions between now and then. I'm not going to spend my time invested in, and I think this is one other thing that Lee was getting to, the whole notion of analysis paralysis. I am not going to spend my good working years thinking, oh, gee, but what could I be doing now to try and live to 90? But it's like, you know what? Frankly, I didn't think I'd live to see 70. So I'm looking at 70 and going, I think I'm going to make it there. I think that's a good thing. And determine what's acceptable. What are our tolerances? That's a big thing on the PMBOK. And what are our tolerances? How far are we willing to go? And then if we happen to get gravy beyond that, it's a bonus.
Yeah, the tolerances is really important. Did you guys see that as in projects, we think about setting those ahead of time. But in life, I'm wondering, do we feel it that way? How did you guys experience the reality of tolerances in your risk from the health perspective? Was it when he brought out the saw and you're like, that's beyond the pale? Is that an example?
Yeah, I think that certainly has an impact. Fortunately, I slept through that part, so it didn't bother me as much as it could have.
No, I meant in Romania.
I really believe that we need to recognize how simple this process is. It's very common sense based. And one of the things I've always loved with Carl and I have taught a lot. We used to argue about who was number one and number two for ESI. And of course, we had different opinions of who that was. But teaching with them, and I've taught a couple of classes in Southern Maryland with Carl. All Carl understands are those damn Post-it notes. That's what he breaks it down into simplistic terms with Post-it notes. And people eat it up because it's easy to understand now. I saw him over there, and one of the ways he gauges how long he's going to live is how long does the supply of Post-it notes last. And so you got to understand. He's found a way to break this down into common sense terms that people cannot feel intimidated by the risk process. Doesn't mean they're doing it, but at least they're not intimidated and they're thinking about doing it.
Well, let me shift on here.
Yeah,
I think
we brought that up. I just want to show you this is my supply of Post-it notes. So I'm
so
still well equipped.
Your LinkedIn, if he starts running low on Post-it notes, fire him off.
I'll order some more. Well, definitely.
I want to shift it up here a little bit then. So moving outside of like the more abstract and using your examples a bit, we talked a little bit earlier about some of this in a pre-brief. One of the things you guys triggered was about taking action. You said the biggest thing that had come across you was, when do you take action? And knowing that is one of the biggest problems. I think, again, we can plan, but it's that, we train, you see the risk trigger, you see the signal, there's a trigger, and that means you then follow the plan and you go do the plan. Is that true? What is your experience about knowing when to take action? Because that seemed to be a flag you threw up telling us to pay attention to. When to know to take action. Is this related to the tolerance only? Is this related to the risk reward? Is that how I link it? Taking action.
I was going to leave that to Lee. Lee, you want me to take that?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll come in if you screw it up.
Okay, I appreciate that. You always do.
That's how he knows when to take action.
Thought you would.
when do you take action? It's a matter of, for most of us, it's a matter of the risk is already converted to an issue, and that's the wrong time to take action. We should go ahead and have at least some steps in advance that allow us to stop the bus before it's parked on the tracks. And that's really one of the big challenges, is trying to define, okay, why am I acting now? Well, what you need is, again, as I said at the outset, you need sage counsel. You need people around you who are willing to tell you, hey, just so you know, that's not right. Now, Lee has met my lovely wife, Nancy, who is a goddess to be worshipped. And what's interesting is Nancy is my bellwether. She'll tell me if I'm doing something phenomenally stupid. And it's the reason we've been married for 40 years. And the nice thing about that is I've got somebody who can say, no, you're fine. You're doing well. It's okay. Relax. Or is going to go, are you serious? Are you kidding me? And she'll stop the bus at the appropriate time. You should look for those people. Look for the helpers, as Mr. Rogers would say. Look for the helpers within your organization.
And that's back to your, we need other people. It's really important, other people. Go ahead, Lee.
I just want to throw in, kind of pick up on what Carl said at the very first about the difference between risk events and risk issues. I used to get phone calls from people who had their PMP, for what that's worth, and asking me what the difference were between those two. And I said, well, if you got yourself a risk issue, it's too late. It already happened. And now you got to deal with it. And that's the way people tend to think. They want to keep it as a risk event. They don't want it to become a risk issue.
It's almost like we have to do the risk of risks. Being ahead. It's like one step ahead, right? It's the first derivative. Catch the directionality and what's happening here. So, Carl, you just mentioned something also that had come up before, that your support structure matters, particularly in the health process. You opened the door with that kind of in a way from a project perspective. How can you guys share about your support structure as you move through getting signals, understanding risk reward, understanding your thresholds, what you were willing to accommodate, knock on risks, and knowing when to take action? Those are all the things we've covered already, guys. So for all our listeners out there, how did that team support structure matter to you?
Well, one of the things I've done is, go ahead, Carl, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, from a project perspective, not from a health perspective, just looking at this, and I think it was Toyota that always had the stop the line thing, where they told, they empowered any one of their employees to stop the assembly line if indeed there was a problem that they potentially saw as serious enough to stop things. That would be a good thing. That would have been a great thing for whoever built the side window in the Boeing 777 MAX that blew out on the Alaska Airlines flight. So that's the kind of thing where we want to make sure that that's the way to build it in, is so that everybody has a responsibility in that particular regard. It's not just one person. It's got to be everybody you're in touch with. The one of the things I love about my oncologist, her name is Blanche. You got to love that. But Blanche is like the most upfront, direct, brusque woman you ever met. She's very good at telling you, don't do that, or do that. And sometimes, if you listen carefully, there's good news. She said, I do see one thing in your blood work that's really worrying me, Carl. And I said, what's that? Your sodium level is very, very low. You need to suck down a lot more salt. When in your life have you had anyone say, ooh, you need to be eating more salt? It's like, yes.
Sounded like you need power.
I've been in this business 55 years now. And one of the things I became smart at right away is finding who the smartest guy in the room is and sucking their brain. So every job I've held, which is, I think, 4 companies total, one of the very first things I do is find out who that person is. who's the person who's been there, done that, got the T-shirt, so that I can go to them as a mentor and ask the kinds of questions and know I'll get a straight answer, like Nancy, like my wife was. I know they're not going to play any games. They're going to tell you like it is. That's what I want to find in the workplace. I can still name every single one of those people and talk about what they did for me. And then I try to do the same thing for others. So it's sort of it's a giant risk pyramid scheme. And by doing that, we can build the capabilities within the organization through personal contact.
Oh, I like what you just said. You took it to the organization there, which takes us a little out of our health perspective, perhaps. I don't know. Maybe you can walk it back there. But what is this about building our capability more broadly? And where I'm linking it to is, you guys had talked to me earlier about where the team matters most is in execution, when the decisions are to do things. That's where the support structure and the teams kick in. How do we, A, how did you observe that? And then B, how can we take that to our organizations? What is it that you're seeing in there, and what are the implications that we can take away from that? The team in execution to build the capability.
One of the things that had really taught me a lesson is that when you get so smart, you tend to want to do it yourself. And people become reliant on you. And there's a problem time, they look to you to solve the problem. As far as I'm concerned, I want to hand it right back to you and tell you, look, use the intelligence you've built and solve the problem. Don't come to me for answers. I'll be glad to give you input, but be prepared to take action yourself. And I think not only does that build your personal capabilities, but it builds your organizational strength and spreads the wealth around in terms of who is going to do a good job and who is not.
I think a big part of that too is, and I think back to, and a lot of people had different feelings about the guy, but the best boss I ever had was Ed Phelps. And Ed was brilliant at doing one thing, just telling you, go do this. And you'd be like, but what if I screw it up? And he goes, oh, well, you screw it up. And for the most part, he was pretty confident you wouldn't screw it up, but at the same time, he was willing to live with the repercussions if you did. He didn't just leave you hanging out to dry if you failed at something, but at the same time, he did allow you to fail. And I think that's one thing that's missing in a lot of organizations.
Ed definitely was willing to take a risk. He was. It was. I mean, you could be confident that he would give you the freedom to try it, even though he knew you'd probably fall on your butt. He's willing to let you try it.
Yeah, that's interesting because that's an acknowledgement of
a lot of organizations.
Well, but I'm wondering how much of that you needed to do in your personal life, though. It sounds like the opposite of taking some of the risks that you may have taken. I'm not sure. He allowed you to fail. You don't want your doctors to allow you to fail here if you can avoid it, I would imagine.
Actually, the evil doctor, the evil oncologist, my first one. I allowed him to fail. And it's like, okay, after the failure, I had plenty of lessons learned, like a good project manager. And I also recognized that was not something that was within my tolerances in this particular environment. It's like I couldn't tolerate failure on his part. So I got two new oncologists, and they both have told me, they've been perfectly frank about what's going to succeed, what may not succeed, what's going to work, what isn't going to work. And, given the level of performance that they've done so far, I have total confidence in their ability to foul something up and allow me to recover from it. That's where my tolerance is. Allow me to recover from it.
I want to ask you on that. When you first opened the discussion about the first oncologist, and you mentioned it to me before, I had a question with that for you. I was afraid that sounded like somebody was telling you the truth and you didn't want to hear it. This is going to hurt. It may not work. There may be tragic outcomes of this, but they're worse if you don't. I was afraid that part of the lesson I was hearing was, oh, if you don't like the answer, you're getting shot. But it sounds like you were actually, I hear you saying something else. It's like his execution was wrong. It wasn't how he talked about it, which may also be problematic, bad bedside behavior. But that might just be truth. I mean, that just may be the trade-offs that you're facing. Was it about the execution? And so what is my risk lesson here? Beware of who helps you mitigate? Like, tell me more.
Listen to the voice. I mean, here's something very strange, and because I know Lee has the voice. It's a voice inside your head. We all have voices in our head. We have instincts. We have gut. And what's tragic is a lot of times we don't trust ourselves to actually make the best call, to actually know, I don't have as much information as this guy does because he's got a medical degree and a PhD and a bunch of other stuff. But something's telling me I'm getting a bad vibe out of this. And when we're getting that kind of gut response on our projects, in our day-to-day lives, Houston, you have a problem. It's time to call time, step back, and reassess the situation, reassess the risk. Because if your own gut is telling you, now I need to act, then you're probably right.
So taking this picture at the biggest level, Lee, let's go to you for a second. In hindsight now, looking at the whole arc of what you observe as managing your risk around your health relative to your diabetes and its consequences, what would you have done differently? How could you have applied what you've been telling 40 and hearing from 40,000 people differently that would have altered any part of this in a meaningful way to you?
That's awesome. Following what Carl just said, I would have listened to my internal head. That's what I would have done. I knew what was right and what was wrong, and I didn't analyze, if you do this, this is potentially what's going to happen. I've convinced my daughter, the attorney, to use a decision tree analysis process when making decisions on how she's going to interview witnesses on the stand. That's what I should have done, because my voice was telling me, don't do that, and I'll be darned if I didn't do it anyway.
At the point where you got signals, was there any change in how you would have reacted to those or how you viewed your thresholds? Or was at that point it was more mechanistic?
Yeah, for me there was. I mean, most of this problems happened since my wife passed away. I didn't have anybody to help me because she, like Nancy, is a helper. So I was on my own. And what I found out was I wasn't doing very well on my own. I wasn't listening to what my experience was telling me.
Carl?
Yo.
Your thoughts in hindsight, looking at it as a risk manager, how would you have addressed anything differently?
So far, the only thing is when I got the bad vibe from the first oncologist, I would have stopped that bus much sooner. But the reality is, there's wood to knock here somewhere. There we go. Knock wood. I have been really, really blessed because ever since that first go round, I did listen to my instincts. I did trust the risk vibe I was getting. And I walked away at a very propitious moment because I was on an early protocol for a brand new drug with the radiation therapist. Here's the kicker. Here's today's medical profession. This is why you need insurance. Let's see, insurance. That's a transfer strategy. Yeah,
right.
But you need insurance because my meds for every month are run about $22,000 a month. Wow. And if I didn't have health insurance to cover the lion's share of that, I'd be toast. I would be finished.
We talked about teams.
My operations are running about 120,000 so far. Yep. It would have been a lot cheaper just to do it right in the first place.
Yeah. Something that you guys mentioned to me that struck me very personally when you were prepping for this earlier, when we were talking earlier in the season somewhat, was that there is a combination between what we look at as personal risk and what we end up getting to do as project managers. That is, if we are not able and fit to do our work, we don't get to do our work. if we're not able and fit to be members of these families and part of the support team, it doesn't matter. And I thought that was really important, and I wanted to highlight it back to our people and let you guys, our listeners, and let you guys talk to it somewhat, which is when you combine all of this, we are humans and our time is only so long. And I don't stop and think about that. And so my health may stop and make me think about that. How do you reflect on being a PM and addressing the workload and the risk and the health as we take this on? We're people.
My work is my health. I'm a workaholic zealot, and I love my job. And I know Lee does too. I know Lee well enough to know he gets up in front of a room and just let him go. Just let it happen. He's having a great time. Don't stop him now. And for me, it's largely the same thing. It's just a matter, I so adore doing the voodoo I do that it is part of my therapy, and it's part of my mitigating life risk. You know, a therapist that I talked to at one point made the point, said, talking about retirement, said, yeah, I have a lot of patients who retire and die. I was like, wow, that's just prophetic and grim. So rather than going to the and die part, I think I'll stick with where I am.
Well, we don't want to be too late to make the changes we need to make, but Lee?
My time working is like Carl. That's my life. That's what I do. And being cooped up in this place for 3 months on this recovery is frickin' driving me crazy. And so I've turned into a LinkedIn zealot. And so I'm on LinkedIn like 20 hours a day sometimes, and that fills the void. But it's getting to where that ain't doing it anymore. I got to go the next level of drug.
Well, I appreciate. By the way, I follow you, Lee, which is how I got to. I wanted to say actually, I appreciate you sharing what was happening. It came out of nowhere. It felt like, and then those of us that follow you on LinkedIn, kind of got to see your journey. And Carl also, I knew there was like a troubled time, and I had heard about it, and then you started to engage in the market again. And I'm grateful for LinkedIn and the fact that you guys choose to use it to share with your communities. That may not be for everyone, but I personally have appreciated following both of you, and I was glad when Harry was able to line both of you up here. So I invite everyone to follow you and to watch the stories that you're telling and where you're engaging. I also heard, buy Carl stickies, and somebody needs to start inviting Lee to show up and keep giving speeches somewhere. Is what I just heard there. Get you out of the house there for both of you. Thank you so much for sharing these personal stories. And I wanted to highlight to everyone, these are not old days stories. Let me tell you about what happened to me a long time ago. Both these gentlemen have achieved great heights and then ran into this. And these are recent stories. These are 21, 22, 23 stories, right? This is what has happened to the people you're sitting in front of you right now on the screen. So I invite everyone to follow you. And with that, actually, before I sign off, Carl, you have a book coming out. Is that right? Or just came out? One of the two.
I've got one book that just came out, which is the Risk Management Prep Cert Guide. And I've got one book that I don't even have in front of me that is coming out. Oh, yes, I do have it. I have the proof copy in front of me. You can tell it's a proof copy because it's covered in, yes, Post-its. And it's the Stage 4 project.
It feels like a pun.
Well, it's talking about the whole cancer journey. So that's what that one is.
Well, thank you guys, both of you, very much for that. We'll look out. Where will we see that? Will we see that on Amazon? Will we see that through PMI?
That'll be, yeah, they're both on Amazon. So if you're looking for your risk management cert, that book's out there. It's by Pearson. And if you're looking for my cancer journey, that's going to be on Amazon around Valentine's Day.
Excellent. Wow.
A lovely Valentine present for your significant other. Yeah.
Always what they wanted was risk. It's almost like buying house chairs. So with that, I need to turn this over to Beth. Hey, so you PMs that are listening in here, you got to mitigate the risk of losing your certification. So you get to watch for the survey and the PDU artifact that Harry and those kick out. So you can get your one PDU out of this because I know that also matters. And you can help us out by filling out the survey so we can continue to have good guests and figure out what we might want to share with you back on this channel under Southern Maryland under the Southern Maryland channel. So thank you for listening in, and thank you, Southern Maryland, for always making sure this is happening, and for PMI WDC and continuing to promote this and bring our audience in. Dan, he's out there in production. Thank you for making the inner tubes work, man. Back over to you, Beth.
Thanks. Well, this was not your typical risk discussion, as Kendall had promised it would not be your typical risk discussion. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. There were some good nuggets in there, and it was definitely interesting and entertaining, in my opinion. We have a few announcements before we wrap up. Our first announcement is about an event that is near and dear to my heart. It is the DC Regional Project Management Day of Service, hosted by Project Management for Change in partnership with the University of Maryland Project Management Center for Excellence. Registration for PM volunteers opened yesterday, and there has already been a tremendous response. We could, however, use more nonprofit registrations. So if you know a nonprofit that could benefit from pro bono project management support, please ask them to check it out. Our event webpage can be reached by using the QR code that is on the screen now, or go to bit.ly/D_C24. PMI WDC is hosting a virtual event called The Gift of Influence, Creating Life-Changing and Lasting Impact in Your Everyday Interactions by Tommy Spalding. This event is scheduled for tomorrow at 5 p.m. It is a virtual event. The chapter's next book club event meeting, also a virtual event, will be on February 15th at 5 p.m. The book is The Long Game, How to Be a Long-Term Thinker in a Short-Term World by Dory Clark. Finally, don't forget to submit your PDU claim for tonight. Fill out that survey, give us feedback. Thank you, and have a good night.